Koehn, and I'm from Terrace. I used to be from Prince George. I worked in Prince George for a long time, but now I'm very proud to say I'm working in the Terrace School District.
And I'm Frances Roch, and I have worked in Prince George School District for 36 years, and I'm newly retired, so just a pleasure to be here and working with all the wonderful people in this room. So we're going to start by mixing you up. We decided it was time that you got to meet some of the other wonderful teams that have come to join us in our journey. So at your tables, you all have a colored rainbow popsicle stick, because rainbow is the theme of the day, as you'll soon find out. So with your popsicle sticks, in the middle of each table, you can see here, this is a yellow table. So if you have a yellow popsicle stick, we're going to ask you to meet here. This is turquoise. We might have to reshuffle, but we'll see. That is kind of a reddish, I guess. And
Were they both there?
yeah. Okay, so our hopes are that there should be 6 to 8 at a table. We seem to be low on yellow folks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if the table seems to be a little bit crowded, if we could have a few folks join the yellow people, that would be fabulous. 4, 5, 6, 7. 6. So maybe, yeah, thank you very much. That's
Thanks,
great,
Christine.
Christina. Excellent. Okay, so now that you're kind of in a new arrangement, if you would turn to a person beside you, either side, that would be your AV partner for the first part of the morning. Okay, so just find your AV partner.
So we want to start off today by touching bases with one of the things that we talked about yesterday, which was establishing a community of learners. And many people do this in many ways. We wanted to make that connection that each of us establish a community and build within that classroom the trust and the sense of responsibility and the ownership on the part of the teachers and the students. In our classroom, and I team taught for many, many years in a K1-2 or a 1-2-3 with teacher Denise Wilson in Prince George, and we had 50 students generally in one classroom. So we would generate our promises to each other. It would take about, it's about a 6-week process with us as we sort out what we can commit to and what we can't commit to, and that's the way that we build our interdependent community. Everybody in that school participates in the same activity. And it's really a miracle because at the end of the day, we all have very, very similar promises to each other. And as a teaching group, and with our SAs or our support workers, we sat down, we said, these are the things that we are wanting to move towards. And it's truly amazing because we have a common goal, but the students generate the ideas, the students generate what they're willing to commit to, and then we all sign. Everybody has to sign because we're making a promise to each other. And it's a fabulous journey. And the nice thing is that we are able to live with these rules for the rest of the year, and they're not so much as rules as ways of being in our classroom. So again, it's the same values that we see in the 4 C's in the community of learners. But it was always to realize that purpose of graduating with those choices and dignity and options, which is really funny because when you're teaching kindergarten and you're explaining to the students what the learning intention is, and they're, well, I just got here, and you're talking about graduating. What are you talking about? But because as they work in the different classrooms around the school, they're seeing the same promises, just looking a little bit different in different classrooms, then they grow to understand this is the way we are inside this building, and hopefully in the larger community around us.
Yep. And just to let you know, Debbie, of course, is talking about the wonderful practices that she incorporated into her classroom. And I will try at times just to bring in the perspective of the principal, because when I went to Glenview, I had the great privilege of working with these people as the principal. And back to the promises in the classroom and the wonderful community of learners work that was done yesterday. When I put on my hat, I wish I could have gone back about 10 years because we did similar work to that, but we started at the staff level in terms of what we wanted to see in our school, etc. And then it filtered down. That was in the days of effective behavior support, etc. Then it filtered down to our students and parents, and they gave input, and we thought that was wonderful. But of course, when I saw this version of lifting from the classroom up, I thought, oh my God, that's how we need to do the school-wide work as well. So if I were able to go back and do it again, I would lift all that wonderful work from the classroom up to the staff and the parents, and I think there would be so much more ownership. One of the reasons why I'm doing this with Debbie is of all the classrooms I have seen over my career, what was so noticeable about a classroom where formative assessment practices were truly embedded was the engagement of the students. There was no doubt when I walked into that classroom, those students were focused. They owned what they were doing and they knew where they were going. And that was quite unusual, 5 or 7 years ago to see that kind of behavior in a classroom. So I'm hoping, as I said, just to bring in my perspective of what it meant to the school, and Debbie will lead you through how she embedded these practices in her classroom. So of course, the learning intention of the first part of the session is I can apply AFL strategies in my classroom practice. And I'm sure you've all heard the words of the big six, the learning intentions, the criteria, descriptive feedback, questions, self and peer assessment, and ownership. And Debbie will lead you through examples, but we also hope to have you share your work with your AB partners and maybe a little bit up on the charts, etc. Did you want to say anything?
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, the definition, of course, of many, it is a planned process in which assessment elicited evidence of student status is used by teachers to adjust their ongoing instructional procedures or by students to adjust their current learning tactics. And of course, a large part of this work is the work that is actually being done by students and the difference that it makes to them.
And what I would hope that you would get through this is the so what part. So what if you use learning intentions? So what? What does that mean? Because that's the important piece, is the so what and the reflection about what's happening involved in using formative assessment. We can all use those six strategies, but it comes down to, so what does that mean to those students? So what does that mean to my teaching? What changes am I going to make either for the students or for myself?
Okay, so learning intentions. Provide learners with clarity about and understanding. And by the way, we changed a lot of this last night about 11 after we heard from Judy and Linda and all of their wonderful questions. So you will see their questions inserted in the PowerPoint, and we're hoping we didn't make any huge errors. We got a little bit bleary-eyed. Learners should be able to tell someone else in their own words what the learning intentions are and how they connect to life beyond the school.
And we, as a staff, we found developing strong learning intentions very, very difficult. Because even if we were using our performance standards as our progression of skills, so that, what is it that we want those students to do? What is that end result? And how can we get into the language that the students understand? So we actually started with using a lot of exemplars and having the students define for us, what is it that you think that we want from this task? So we were asking them at that point to retell information during a comprehension task. I can tell what happened at the beginning, middle, and end of the story, having students identify what do you think is an important part of this learning intention. So finding that learning intention is great. That's a lot of work on the teacher's part and the student's part. However, then comes the so what part. because the students take that back to their seat. They've been there for half an hour, but apparently they are all children from the time traveler's wife, because many students forget what is going on. So in the next slide, and it's true, because they have been engaged, you think, oh my gosh, we've got the learning intention, we're all ready to roll, we've got our criteria, we're all ready to roll, but they get back and they get stuck. So in order for them to fulfill those learning intention, they actually have to have strategies and skills that will enable them to work independently while you're working with those small groups or individuals. So after we had spent a year or so investigating the learning intentions, we came to the realization very, very quickly that we had to provide that structure in place for them. And we had to have a reference point in that room for them to know what are they going to do when they get stuck, right? So that they weren't coming back up to us, that they were being interdependent in that community. And for us, that's what that community of learners is interdependence among the learners, including ourselves. So we always found that as soon as we introduced learning intentions or started with our learning intentions, our very next step was, what can you do to realize those learning intentions and make sure that you are able to work independently and on your own, or with your student friend and buddy. We spend a lot of time with our families because the work that we're doing in our classrooms does not look like what happened when they went to school. So, and that piece of ownership has to belong to the students. So Miranda here this is actually in September, in that first meeting with the parents. And so Miranda already has her portfolio started, and she's showing her mom exactly what it is that she can do and what her goals are going to be next. So I'm at the end of the table, but Miranda and her mom have about 15 or 20-minute conversation. Miranda saying, well, this is where I am in my writing skills. This is where I am. This is where I think I am. And here's my proof. So you can see that the mom has samples. There's a book beside her. She's read a passage aloud to her mom from the book. That's the leveled reading piece. So she's proving to her mom, this is where I'm at in my learning. So now the mom has the same evidence that I have. So that, and the mom and I and Miranda will have a three-way conversation about what are Miranda's next steps. Where is she going? So right off the bat, we start with the learning intentions, so that Miranda is explaining to her mom, these are my learning intentions for my learning this year. So that the conversation, when I have that conversation with the mom, and when the reporting period comes out and the report no longer looks like what the mom has been accustomed to her own experience, there's a lot of background knowledge already built in. So besides having the parent meeting with the children, the conferences in the classroom, we hold parent information nights. So at the very beginning of our journey, we had every parent attend because we serve lasagna. So we had lasagna and literacy night, and we had everybody come, and then we had macaroni and math night, and as we went through the changes in how we were teaching and how our classrooms were looking different, we wanted our parents to be part and process along the way. Did everybody support us? Absolutely not. But did everybody hold some knowledge about the changes that were happening? Absolutely yes. And I think that piece of having that knowledge right at the beginning of the journey is so important.
And of course, as a principal, when you're doing all of that good scanning work in your school and in your classrooms, a wonderful way to talk to children, to have those conversations, is to sit down and to ask them, what are you learning? What are the learning intentions? And, you know, in many classes where this isn't embedded, that often you will get kind of a shake of the head or not sure, whatever, whereas in these classrooms, often enough, the children can tell you quite explicitly what the intention is and what they are doing and where they're going. So there again, the principal, at the same time as the teacher is collecting evidence, the principal is doing exactly the same thing from directly from the classroom. So it makes for very rich conversations. Speaking of which, we want to give you a chance. That was kind of, and Debbie and I were talking last night about the difficulty of learning intentions. So if you're new to this, please, don't feel overwhelmed. Many of you in the room we know are experts, but this learning intentions often enough are, when you have a deep conversation about them, they are very, very difficult. They're not something you discuss in 5 minutes. So we're trying to get a read of the room. And what we would like you to do is 2 things with your AB partner. Talk about, we'll give you, say, 5 minutes. Where are you with formative assessment? Say specifically learning intentions. Are you comfortable with them? Here's some really good ideas that I use, that kind of thing. What's next for you? What do you want to do? This information will be invaluable to your coaches as they begin to get to know the context of your school. We would also like you to use the cups because, of course, with your AB partners, that's a form of self-assessment, right? So I'll let Debbie explain.
The cups actually represent the traffic lights, and many of you are familiar with the traffic light strategy. So I have experimented with many forms of traffic lights. We've had flip cards, we've had individual cards, popsicle sticks, you name it, we've tried it. So I actually like the cups because it's really easy to see as a teacher when I scan the room where everybody's up. So green means I'm good with what you're talking about, I understand it, and I can explain it to the person beside me. Yellow means I kind of get it, I have some understanding, I have some questions too. And red means, hello, you better come and visit me right now because I don't know what you're talking about. And as a teacher, I need to know all the time where your level of understanding is. So after we've gotten through the playing with the cup stage, which takes about a day, then the students start shuffling the cups. So if I see the student has a yellow cup, I may not go over to them right away. I'm going to give their partner time to explain where they're at. However, if that yellow cup does not change to green within the time of discussion, I'm going to go over and see what I can do to help. If you have a red cup, I'm going to come as quickly as I can because I don't want you frustrated and I want you owning your learning and I want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can possibly do to move you forward. And of course, green means I'd like you to go and help somebody else. If you understand and you can explain, and I've heard your explanation, I'm probably going to send you to a yellow cupper. Because I may not get to someone with the yellow cup, but you probably have a great understanding, so I'm going to send you over to work with that person while I work with the red group. So we would like you to show us, and we'd like the coaches in the room to circulate around the room and take a look and see where the level of understanding is. So
And perhaps to help with some quick questions. So if you, at the end of 5 minutes, would, here come the cups, would you write on your sticky notes where you're at and what's next?
I get yellow. What do we get? Yellow.
Explaining kids is so much.
It is, yeah. Well, once you can get a few articulate kids,
Down the road, you run into the skill for this, but they couldn't really understand at the moment when it was too abstract for them. So these are questions I have.
when they go to
It
Saturday,
has to be on both sides. Kids have to know too. Yeah. I know, that's amazing. I'm just wondering how long these would last. But anyway.
Yeah.
But I guess you have to have a good supply. I really like this idea.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah.
It's not too noisy. I mean,
That's right.
I've seen little clappers
and
used.
visible.
they don't break it too easily.
The content you're conferencing is the meat that goes on with the cafe. Yeah.
I want them to figure out the learning intention. Like I don't always want to just put it black and white. I want them sometimes to figure.
Well, for these kids,
You know, like the mystery lesson. You know, like where's it going? Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
But the intention isn't the outcome. It's not the answer.
Okay, we're going to move on, but before we do, are there any burning questions or comments? I really liked the question from over here about what's the difference between the LO and a learning intention. And learning objectives or in IRPs tend to be very, very big. And the learning intention is very explicit and specific to the skill that you're teaching. So you are trying to narrow it down into something that's very manageable. So we might have the same learning intention for the same for the whole group. But if we go back to that previous slide that showed the learning intention, you'll notice that the criteria presents the differentiation for that lesson. Oh, sorry, maybe it's for here. So
And we'll get into criteria right now.
yeah, so in this criteria, there's a choice of how you're representing your knowledge according to where it's an early primary class. So some people are going to represent their understandings in pictures, some people are going to represent in sentences, depending on where they're at with their learning. So for us, we use our criteria to establish differentiation within the classrooms. How are you going to do this task? Okay.
There was also a comment, I believed, about somebody said they were green with the knowledge and yellow with the implementation. Yeah. I think probably many people are at that stage. I don't know if you want to comment on that quickly. What we're trying to do here, of course, is to get a sense of where we are. And of course, we are, you know, all over the map in terms of our separate journeys. But this is really good information for coaches to see, well, you know, this might be a starting point, or this is some kind of work I can do. This is just awesome information. And of course, hopefully those with the green cups are taking the opportunity to further clarify. But please don't get frustrated if everything isn't answered today, is what I'm saying. That's the work that we want to do this year with you in your schools. So do you want to comment on the knowledge and the implementation?
It takes a long, long time to really figure out who are your learners, because the learning intention has to suit the learning needs and that end product that you want from your learners. So, which is why I really love teaching the same group of students for more than 1 year in a row, and why I've always worked in multi-grade classrooms is because it gives me an opportunity to really know my learners. So by the time if I have them for 2 years, at the beginning of the second year, I have a very, very strong understanding of who my learners are. But it takes a while to understand who your learners are. And that is part of that data collecting piece, because we're trying to build an understanding and a profile of each learner so that we can meet their learning needs. And indeed, it takes a while to understand who your learners are, how they learn, what activities that you need to provide to suit their learning needs.
And just one last note, as we're going through, if you could kindly, on the sticky notes, I hope we have enough, just make note learning intentions, not sure knowledge versus implementation or whatever. Keep them with you, and at the end of the section on formative assessment, we will post them, and I will collate them so that we have a sense of where we are in the room. Okay, so if you could kindly keep that in mind as we go through the formative assessment strategies. Okay, here we go.
And then sharing criteria for success. And again, for me, that whole criteria piece is a big so what? So if what you are going to do is that piece of learning intention, this is what you guys are going to do, that criteria is how are you going to do it? What is it going to look like while you do it? And it's becoming more and more important that it is co-created with the classroom students and the teacher, because otherwise, again, what makes it any difference from any other task? Because as long as the teachers are constantly creating that criteria, then that ownership of the learning is still in the teacher's hands. So this is our overall, upfront load. This is what we are going to expect with your journal writing. By the time we finish with all the teaching that's going to go on, guess what? This is what we're aiming for. So up front, everybody knows that they have some kind of idea of where we're headed. But the group I'm working with today, this is what I'm specifically teaching to. And so this is criteria that they have developed, and we've been working on it for some time. And so this is very short, very to the point, very quickly understood, because this is what this group is. But I want them to understand that this is the long-term goal. So when I work with a small group, I try to always make sure that that group's criteria, while I'm working with them and teaching them in small group, is right next to our long-term learning intentions and goals and criteria, so that they understand how we're doing is what I'm doing is I'm going to help you get here, and this is how we're going to go about doing it. So that purpose is there for that learning, because what are you writing in your journal? No, it's really not just to tell me about your day or about whatever event it is. The purpose for journal writing is for you to learn these specific writing skills. You are telling me a story, and I treasure your story, but you know what? As a teacher, these are the things that I'm looking for in your journal writing. However, I do want it always to connect to that end product, that end goal, so that eventually, when we are doing journal writing, it becomes an independent activity.
And that's posted in your class.
And it's posted all year in my
Do
classroom.
you want to talk a little bit about how this was another thing I noticed about this classroom when I walked in September. Many classrooms, of course, are beautifully done up, and we're very proud of how beautiful our classrooms are and how welcoming. In this classroom, it's still beautifully done up, but there's nothing on the walls, which was kind of a little bit peculiar when you're used to seeing all the whatever's on the walls. And that was very purposefully done, so that as the students and the teachers co-constructed criteria and learning intentions, then those were posted on the walls, and the students referred to those all year round. Of course, independent self-regulation, and that's what built the walls of the classroom, was all of the student and teacher learning that was going on. So it evolved through the year. It was very cool.
The wall was up
Yeah,
and
that
ready
was
to
up,
go,
yeah.
but the words weren't on it because we added them each week as we went through the program. So again, criteria is great, but it's not a standalone. It's a so what. So how can you share that criteria with others that you've met that criteria? And that could be very, very time consuming. If individual students are constantly showing where they've met the criteria. Nobody in our classrooms ever works alone, and I noticed that yesterday too, that in every slide it was always students. It was never a student. And I think in a AFL classroom, nobody is working alone. It really hit me over the head that students need to always, it's a social learning environment for a good reason. Because I was in that school for 7 years, and I taught those students for 3 years in a row kind of thing, and then they went on into the next team teaching situation. When I went to work with them, I always asked, who taught you to read? And not once did they say Mrs. Koehn. And it's true. They always name their student coach. They name someone in their family. Because, and if you say, well, how did you learn to write? They don't, oh, you taught me to write. And they don't. They say, they name their student coach, they name a big brother, they name somebody else, because they've done it in a social context. And that's how students learn, is in a very social context. So here we have actually that's a grade 2 student working with a grade 1 student. And the grade 1 student is going over what the criteria was, which we, after we generate the computer, we just run it off immediately and get it stapled onto their sheets so that they can refer to it right away, so that we all know what the criteria is, because there might be 3 or 4 different sets of criteria because we're working in such a large classroom. So we need to know what, as educators, we need to know who's doing what. It's very confusing with 50 kids happening there. And so he's referring to his criteria, he's going to go through his paper and prove that he's met that criteria. An enormous piece of learning is happening for both of them. Tia is coaching him and helping him to make changes too in his work. Well, you think you've met that. Show me. That's not actually what you've done. This is what I think that is. You have an option, and we teach our students not to say you have to make a change. We teach our students to say, you have an option. You could change it to meet the criteria, or you could leave it. Because eventually it is going to land on my desk, and if it is important to me that I work with that student one-on-one, or I might let it go, it would depend on how many times that child had that criteria. So the criteria and the feedback go side by side. Because if you're proving and showing evidence that you've met the criteria, and you're engaging in that conversation of how you met the criteria, here's evidence that you met the criteria, then you're engaging in a conversation and dialogue around feedback. So I finally came in probably about 5 years ago. This is the criteria at the top of the page that you have to show me in your work. So as I'm assessing and doing my teacher thing, I'm writing down, you need to show me that I don't know what this was. Let's say you must spell words correctly. So it's at the top of his page. So in addition to the criteria we've generated as a group, in addition to the criteria, so he chooses 2 criteria personally that he's going to work on, but he better show me that this criteria is in his work. And I started writing across the top of their books so that I had evidence that they were moving forward. So if you have the same personal criteria 3 times, then I need to have a little conversation with you. You're not showing me you're moving forward, because we should be moving forward in the feedback. So it just actually it became their assessment going home. So-and-so has successfully worked on, and it became a way of reporting to parents that this is the way your child is moving forward in their learning. This is evidence of their learning. And they would choose whatever pages to prove to their parents that, this is evidence that, yeah, I made this change. And it becomes a huge source of ownership and pride. I can prove to you that I'm learning because, Ms. Koehn and I decided we're working on word wall words, and look, I no longer have that as a criteria or goal for myself. I've got that under control. I've moved on. So in terms of success, it's a very nice way to achieve 2 goals, moving the child forward and pride in work. And then again, the A-B partners. So we have a lot of cross-grade work going on in the building. So grade 5 students would be working with grade 3 students, grade 4 with grade 2. We try to keep it to the 2-grade difference because they're still within the same learning spectrum. And so here's some feedback from one of the partners. I'm so proud of you, your spelling is improving. And then the feed forward, that's what you need to work on, is sound out your words carefully and look for words on the word wall.
So we're going to go into A-B partners.
Yeah, we're going to have some A-B partner talk.
So we're going to ask you, you can keep your same A-B partner or switch it up, whatever. Criteria, descriptive feedback. Where are you at? What's the next step? Show us with your cups how you're feeling about your understandings and implementations, and then we'll have a quick debrief.
Well, the thing about it, though, is that you have to just jump in and do it. Like, it's not about you knowing all the answers. It's about, because you know what, truthfully, some of the best learning that's happened in my classroom, and I'm fairly capable technologically, is kids will say, hey, I just did this. And then I'll be like, oh my gosh, that's such an easier way to do that. Let's just do it that way now.
Like, this is what I'm expecting. These are the things we're working on. And then at the end of it was so easy. It was like, wow, it's built into it. And so that was, I did appreciate that. It was kind of like an aha moment. I was like, oh, this actually does work.
Did this, he came into my class This was years ago, and at the end of his lesson with the kids, he had them do a quick assessment of the participation within their group. It's a pie. So let's say it's just you and I, and it's like this. There's me, there's you.
You're wearing lots of hats.
You know, so maybe one
So
kid
we're
that's
both the
like
same
this,
amount of kids this year,
one
and
kid
it's the
that's
same. I
like
think our
this,
principal,
right?
I think he's point
You know, that's
something.
okay, except
And I'm
for
sharing
that.
with him, so I've been having new
I have to.
And we have to agree.
You know,
So here's you and me, and you have to before
I don't teach
you draw the line.
And they would kind of be proud of it too when they knew it was being displayed.
Well, and having your kids be able to talk about, their reading, and what they do understand, what they think that they where their skill level is. When she talked about those little ones being able to talk about their skill level at this point, this is what I need to work on. I think it's so critical, and it's really explicit. It's not a secret.
And it comes with cards for guided reading, because you do whole group with the readers, right? And then the guided reading cards come in grade level, a grade above, a grade below, and 2 grades.
Please remember, as you're going through these, please jot down that's the best information you can give us is on those sticky notes, and I'll take that away with us. So do be doing that at the same time. Were there any burning questions, concerns?
Stories
I gladly
that
hand
you'd
it
like-
all over to Debbie, of course. But
Stories that you'd like to share?
stories, yeah, great.
Just saying that I'm really good at doing this with big projects, things that are sort of multifaceted, and you want to roll it out. But with the day-to-day stuff, like what you were sort of showing with journal writing, I can see how something that's routine gets in the way. But the piece that is really challenging for me is that end piece. And for 2 reasons. It's one, we always run out of time at the end of your lessons, and you're kind of like, okay, we gotta keep rolling, we gotta move on. So this gets compromised, and then the other part is that kids are always finishing, at all different times, and that's actually where our conversation ended. Is what do you do with kids that are finished at different times, and then you bring them back together, and then they do this. So there's kind of that tailoring of the tail end of your lesson. How do you make it happen?
I believe really strongly in only giving tasks that I know, and that's where differentiation comes in too. That the tasks that I'm going to feed back, I'm not a big believer in finishing things at home or homework. I'm a big believer in home learning, but there's a really huge distinction for me in homework, between homework and home learning. So if you're finished the task, you have a number of independent tasks that you are responsible for during the day. You're just going to go on to one of those independent tasks. So if you're familiar with the Daily 5, we've taken that and we've just modified it into tasks that were more needed in the context of our classrooms. So that's what our students do. They go on to their independent tasks, in which they get chunks of time to work on them during the day anyways, but they will start on their independent tasks when they are completed. Or they will move to be a peer tutor or peer coach to someone who is struggling with that task. And that's another thing that we will do, is we will just sit down with the person being coached and the coach and say, can you explain where you're at with your learning? And we sit there between them so that we understand that there's no, we've modeled, you're not doing it and you're not telling them what to do, but what are some questions that you could ask that could help this person get this task finished? So we are very intent on that student coaching model in the classroom. We work a long time on developing student coaches. It's not a one-shot deal. We work a long time on what questions do you ask, what we're establishing what the criteria was, what was the learning intention, what it looks different for you, and so it should. However, how can you help this person move forward in their learning and still represent that person themselves, right? And be respectful. And we spend a long time in establishing cross-grade coaches and peer coaches within the classroom. So,
Question down there?
Well, obviously this is like, there's a lot to be learned, and do you have any of this information somewhere else, articles? You should mention that.
are the videos still on the network? There's 2 videos, and you've seen the videos, and
The whole thing about different coaches, you know, do you have articles on that?
I do have a number of published articles.
There will be a folder for this project, I believe, so we can collate some of the materials and resources and place them on that folder.
We're actually going to create a wiki site so that we can start loading things on. We've got an online folder, as I was saying the other day, all the documents that we've used here will be in that folder, and there'll be a link to that on the wiki site. It's one of the things that's in the process of being created. And Mary Lynn a couple of times yesterday mentioned a stick. You don't have a stick. We were thinking originally we were going to give everybody a memory stick with stuff on it, but we thought something more interactive that would keep growing would be an online folder where we can do that. So the space has been created, and we can link into videos, and then what's great about a wiki is other people can say, we found this great thing, throw it on for the rest of us. So that can be one of the places where we continue to learn together. Linda?
I heard lots of technological skill as I was listening in, and I think, Debbie, let's say you were working in the Nass Valley, you and Nicole. And
She is.
Exactly. That's why I thought it was safe to use it as an example. I think it'd be really important to take advantage and use your iPads, make those small videos as you go, post them fast to the site, and you know, you can be trying it at Bayview at the same time. And so, you know, this community of coaches and the community of people moving along and being unafraid to put our small practices in those bite-sized chunks, because we wrote a chapter about Debbie's work, and Helen Kimberly and Lorna Earl, and we'll put that up on the site, but they searched all around the world to have professional learning conversations that they thought were moving learning forward, and the only one they thought, and they've said this all over the world, the only one they thought actually represented that were the kids in Glenview talking with each other. It was a professional learning conversation the way it should be. So I think, you know, we've got this homegrown expertise in the province, and I think it's really exciting to fold it into the work.
This is just a question leading off posting student videos and things. I know in my classroom at the beginning of the year I have a form for parents to give permission for our blog, our our Twitter links or whatever. So I have that personally, but for this project, do we have a generic form that we can use, because there might be other considerations with this particular project?
We do have to be very cautious about those protections. And sometimes, even though we're careful about not using children's names, sometimes it is, Julie, our tech person, has been thinking about this, as I said, and talking about it. If you have, even though you might not have the child's name, if you have the name of your school and Mrs. So-and-so's class, it's pretty easy to figure out where that child is. So this is something we have to be cautious about, but it's also a very valuable resource, so I think we need to balance those things.
Anybody in here ever use a video on YouTube to learn something? Most of us have, so I think that whole notion of the commons we have to be a little bit respectful of too. So maybe we just have to pick and choose what we actually are willing to put out there. Just a thought.
Yes, but we can put on private or limited. That's what I do with mine. I don't do it public.
We've made a lot of videos over the years, including we've shown learners in the lead, and you really have to see it if you haven't seen it. I've never watched it without crying, and parents who watch it always cry, and I think it's because they wish they could coach their own child the way these learners are being coached. That's my hunch about it. So it's absolutely phenomenal. Well, what we found is that the district and we've been principals, the district and school protocol protect people from kind of body snatching, parent protection kinds of issues. So that hasn't been a problem. But as I'm rewatching, because Francis is
my student teacher at one point, sort of, and Debbie was a graduate student. As I'm watching their teaching, I can make a video in my mind of how they've done this. So I think even just seeing the pieces of teaching, you know, with the intentions and the criteria, you know, if you're nervous about showing individual kids, that would be enough. I think if we could see the intentionality, what are the big ideas being taught, how are the criteria being shared and co-created, and, you know, acting in a pretty protective way. I know that there are thousands of teachers who would benefit from seeing that, because that's, I think we're all making a movie in our mind of our group and how it could be moved forward if we were having a chance to see this in action.
It is about establishing that moral and ethical purpose with the class, with the students themselves, that this is a very worthwhile, purposeful activity, that you're not only helping someone else learn, actually you're consolidating your learning, and you yourself are changing who you are as a learner. And actually, after visiting Mary Lynn's classroom and Terrell's classroom and looking at that community of learners, it really made me think about moving those skills that we need to teach, that are lifelong skills, which of course is what Linda is referring to in that spiral of the inquiry paper. So anyways.
Okay, on to questions. Provide thoughtful questions to lead discussions that demonstrate evidence of learning. Learners know that they must always be thinking and ready with a meaningful response. And we didn't want to be too serious when we got to the questioning part, so usually the questions are a little bit more serious, but whatever. Okay, so this is an example Debbie used in her classroom, but we're going to give you an example. So on your tables you have ABCDE cards. If you could quickly, we didn't put it up on the chart.
Oh well, we'll just ask the question.
Okay, so you have to listen well too. Okay, you each with your partner need ABCD cards. How many sets?
There's one per person.
Okay, one per person. Are you ready?
So everybody needs a complete set of ABCD.
She's got a question she's writing up on the board.
So if you want to direct your eyes over here, she's going to give us the most questions.
All right. The question. Yeah. The question that we're asking is, who was the last male Canadian to win gold at the Olympics? And then I didn't know, we were trying to find a good question, so I Googled male Olympic, or male wrestlers, and woohoo! It was like from bad to worse, to worse, to worse. It was like, whoo, really pornographic sites. I was like, oh dear. Not the question. But anyways, I finally found a Wikipedia source.
And of course in your classrooms, the kids all have sets of these cards. They're usually on a ring. And talk about a quick scan, eh? That's a really nice way when they're all gathered together to scan their learning. They've got the 4 cards. So you are going to show who you think was the last Canadian male to win a medal at the Olympics.
The answer for A is Matt Gentry.
So if you think it's Matt Gentry, you're going to hold up your A card.
The answer for B is Daniel Igalia. The answer to C is Andy Borodo. And the answer to D is Saeed I apologize profusely. Azarbajani.
That's my neighbor.
Okay, so you have a choice, A, B, C, D. So hold up your card.
Matt Gentry, Daniel Igalia, and And Marshall or say as executives.
I don't know.
We have other participation. And it's almost coffee time. So, in a glance, it's such a great way to sort who knows what. Because in a glance, I know exactly where your background information is and what you need in order to move yourselves forward. So in the poster, the fox, that was a very cool way to find comprehension. Because one of those is the big idea of the story. So the students will have read the story or had the story read to them, but I know where they were in comprehension because one of those is the big idea. So after they've told their A, B, C, D, then they have to turn to their AB partner and tell them why they chose that. And then I ask them again, show me again what your card is. Have you changed your answers? Have you thought about what your partner said? And then I put them in group of 4 until I have capacity of everybody having on the same wavelength. So it's a very, very quick way of finding out what your students are thinking and moving them forward to that point. I like ABCD questions. I love hinge questions. So hinge questions are those great big questions that have no correct answer. I do not like the basketball or the ping pong questions that go back and forth when I'm the only person participating in that questioning. And so oh, it's your turn, oh, it's your turn. And so, but I'm controlling it. And so I want to move away from that. And hinge questions are those great big questions, and we collect our hinge questions all year long. So a hinge question last year in my grade 7 classes was Enbridge coming into our area a good thing or a bad thing? Because that's a question that we're going to revisit all year long because we're going to learn more about it. There's going to be issues around it, and we're going to gather that information. We're going to revisit it. So those are questions, those hinge questions hang around our room all year long because those are the questions that are the big questions that we're going to go back to over and over again. Because those are the big questions about life. What are we doing to contribute to our garden? Because I was teaching grade 7 last year. And what are we doing as grade 7 students to contribute to our community garden? No, it's not the 4, 5, 6's responsibility. It's actually our responsibility as school leaders to show good modeling and show how much it means to us. So how are you modeling that? And that was a year-long question also. Again, A, B, C, D, and this one had an E. I had this folded up, so 53 can be represented in the following ways. True or false, which one, prove it.
Which one is false?
Yeah, which one is false, and then prove it.
So you hold up your cards.
And prove that it's false. Or prove that they're all true. So that you can really, really extend the activities, but you get a really good idea in a glance who is understanding the concepts, and you can move on. And then again, there's those thick and those thin questions. The thin questions are the ones that quick task, quick to answer, the answer's right in the text, and those thick questions. And then questions sorting and categorizing. There's some questions that we can answer, some questions that we never answer. They're always going to be there, and that's great, because we weren't the author, or we just we look and we look and we look and we can't find that. And so some are background information. I can't remember who knows what NR.
Not relevant.
Not relevant. What was SW? I'm sorry. I have.
So what?
No, I have a blank here. But this sorting chart is out of it's out of one of Tony Stead's earlier books. Yeah. So it's right out of one of Tony Stead's books. So we're focusing on, and this is really important when we're moving into inquiry work, because our students want to include everything they already know in their inquiry. And we want them to sort out everything that they already know. And that becomes so very difficult for them, because moving students beyond an inquiry is not an opportunity to show what you know. An inquiry is an opportunity to show what you've learned. It's such an important concept for them, but everybody always wants to show what they know. And so we've been really working on, with our inquiry workers and our questions on, you need to sort out. And even if what you find out is this much, that's fabulous, because you've learned that compared to the 30 pages of what you already knew. Okay, so, and then of course, what strategies do you use to answer your questions? So we're working with early primary students. So how do you answer questions? If you develop a question, how do you go about answering that question? Again, this chart would be hanging there forevermore, so that students could say, well, you know what, I can't find the answer, but here's my proof that I tried to infer, here's my rereading of the text, I looked for pictures, I did try asking other people, you know, I thought about it, and these were things I knew, and I still didn't have that answer, so now I'm coming to you to help me lead my learning forward.
Do you want to do one more?
Yeah.
AB? Okay, so we're going to ask you just for a few minutes, once again with your AB partners, how are you doing with questions? How are you feeling? What's your comfort level? Show us with your cups as well, and then we can answer a few more questions, and then we're on to the last section of the formative assessment piece. So we'll give you, say, 3 minutes. Yeah, we'll shorten it up.
I like that first one, because everybody already knows the answer to something. But yeah, you don't spend.
Oh yeah. That's what I see. It's kids that don't get that skill, even being able to orally do that in sharing time. And as they get older, you know, all of a sudden they're being asked to write something, or they don't have that scaffolding from the earlier grades. That you start questioning right away.
You know, you can't just try something once. Oh, that didn't work. You know, you have to think about it. Okay, why didn't it?
It's funny how you write. It's funny how they can use that first word.
You're watching them and you're seeing which ones are doing that.
That's right. Yeah. The thing is, when you're holding up this, is I'm looking around and I'm going,
yeah, I know, and that's what you said.
Okay, you're wearing, you know, and so
You wouldn't hold that up until the teacher would probably
But maybe people have to hide it, and then everybody on the count
keep your answer face down until the teacher says, okay, hold your card up.
Okay. So we're going to wrap this piece up quite quickly. I know everybody's ready for coffee, etc. We don't want you sitting for too long. Are there any burning questions about questions before we move on? Anything that somebody or something, a story or something somebody wants to comment on? Okay, good stuff. On to self and peer assessment. So of course, we hope with your cups that you have been doing some self-assessment, which depends of course upon a clear understanding of the learning intentions and the criteria. And into peer assessment, Debbie has already referred a little bit to coaching, etc. Very, very powerful work, but of course there isn't a lot of time to go into it, so unfortunately we're going to skip through those slides. But the work that was done in their classroom with peer coaching and buddy coaching is some of the most powerful work I've seen. So something that schools might want to look into when they do their inquiry work.
Did someone say there was videos?
There's just a little clip of, so we'll show that, I'm hoping.
On the
sound's
network
gonna
site.
come through, So of course, with regard to peer assessment, are learners confident and comfortable in both giving and receiving feedback to their peers based on that co-constructed criteria?
And that takes it right back to the community of learners. You cannot have peer assessment happening unless you've established a really strong community of learners. It's just not going to, there's not going to be the respect in that classroom to have that happen.
Okay, and just a quick look at the pictures.
And that's cross-grade coaching, older students using performance standards, and the younger student self-assessing, the older student is assessing independently, and then they're going to compare their assessment and see. Again, an older student assessing a younger student's reading fluency, using different colored pens.
Yeah, this is where you really see the engagement of these kids. You don't see too many of them rolling around under the tables and wandering around. They're pretty focused. And there's your feed forward with your buddies. There again, your criteria. How did you move your buddy forward?
So we do this as a lesson with our coaches. So I come in, if they are working with my class, I go into my student coaching class. I explain what the tasks were. I show some exemplars. I talk about what the criteria was that the students were working on. And we go over what are the things that we're looking for in this story, and we talk about ways of moving the buddies forward, coaches forward. And we give very explicit examples from the exemplars. So if you see that your person that you're not coaching is not using punctuation correctly, what are some suggestions? And we brainstorm so that the suggestions are coming from the coaches, but they have a bank hanging on their wall, ready to use, because they're already prepared for their interaction with their student coach. And then they can have a strong conversation.
Okay. And finally, the piece on ownership, which all of the formative assessment strategies feed towards. We need to make sure we provide opportunities for learners to own their learning. They're genuinely engaged, they're confident they can learn and think about their own learning. And now we will cross our fingers that we can hear this. Can we hear it?
And I will meet this goal by using tools around me to find better words like a thesaurus and friends.
Can you read your story for me?
At that very moment, I saw two bulldozers coming towards our den. I heard my mom yell, "Red, get out of this."
Now, so can you please show me where you've met all your criteria, and if you've met that criteria, please highlight it.
Okay, so the first piece is the events of my story are in order based on info from the article.
So I think that down in this part right here was like really based on it. Yeah, that one right there. I think from all this to the back is where you've met most of the based on information. The point of view stays the same throughout the story, so are you writing in third person or first person?
I'm writing in first person all the time because I have the end co-op in my room.
So, yeah, and you've stayed that way throughout the story, so highlight on the rest, or just write all the I's anyways. Well, just most of the I's anyways. Have you developed all your ideas? Is your writing is not just a list of things that happened?
No, because at that very moment I saw two bulldozers coming towards our den. and then I described like what happened during that moment.
Okay, so highlight just that first little sentence that you read. Have you used a variety of sentence lengths?
I have.
So, when the students own their learning, then they can talk about their learning and explain what they've learned to each other and to other stakeholders in the community. So whether that's an adult sitting with that student as they talk about their learning or a student, the quality of conversation and dialogue is basically the same because the student owns what they've learned and is able to share that learning with others, which I think is the whole point of the inquiry and AFL use is how can we create the circumstances for students to own their learning, have pride in themselves as learners, and be able to determine where they are going as learners.
So final section, your ticket out the door to coffee. If you would kindly fill out your sticky notes, where are you now with formative assessment, and be honest, it's just our gauge of some of the work that we need to do as coaches and support and facilitators. Where are you going next? What do you want to go, where do you want to go to next? So once you've placed your sticky notes, please go and have coffee, and we'll give you till about 10:30 or so. Okay, so we have basically completed the piece around assessment for learning, and a huge thank you to Judy and Linda, whose very wise words we lifted off the page last night and inserted them into the work that's gone on with Debbie and Denise at Glenview. But before we move on to performance standards, a huge caution or caveat or whatever. Rome wasn't built in a day. This learning occurred over 5 to 7 years, and Debbie's going to quickly talk about that. So please, we're asking you, wherever you are on your journey, start where you are. Start small, make very small steps. Start with, if you're really working on learning intentions, keep it there. Please don't feel any, pressure that by the end of the year you need to have a classroom where a formative assessment is totally embedded in everything. It just doesn't work that way. It's such complex work. We would hate to see people trying to kind of mash it all into their practice over a 1-year period. That would just be stressful and wrong. So you just need to, where are you? Who are your supports in the building? What do you want from your coach? Start where you are and move forward. That's the point of the whole thing. Okay, so I'll let you talk a little bit about how you went from A to B.
It was 10 years. It took us 10 years. That last videotape, those students who had been with AFL practices, they're in grade 5 in that, and they had started in kindergarten with AFL practices. And so those skills that they had acquired took 6 years to get to that point. It took us 10 years to get that point. Well, it took me 10 years to get that point. I actually was ready to quit teaching, and I had an interview with Canfor in Prince George, and I was ready. I really, really disliked who I was in the classroom. I disliked the way the relationship with my students was, and I was not comfortable anymore being a teacher. And then I met Frances, and she, come to the network. And then I met Judy and Linda, who said, come to CSML. And then I started thinking about different ways of doing things. And I really started looking at things from the students' needs and students' learning rather than my teaching needs. And I started making that shift, but it took me a long, long time. And when we talk about our community of learners, I was so fortunate because I had a community of learners who supported me and kept me afloat, many of whom are in this room. Like Mary Lynn and I have had a reciprocal relationship where she's helping me and I'm helping her, and Judy and Linda have supported me, and Michelle and I have been supporting each other on our learning journey. And that community of learners piece is just huge and enormous. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to replicate for you as our learners, and for us as being part of your learning community, is developing this community of learners. But this did not happen overnight. This happened over a long, long, long time of self-reflection, and of course, when we were doing it, there wasn't a lot of, people would say, well, use learning intentions, but what was a learning intention and what did it look like? We were reading Dylan William, we were reading all the books and all the research and theory, but we really had no idea what it looked like. So I'm hoping that you don't feel overwhelmed, that you're supposed to go from here to here, because learning is always ongoing. It's that continuum and progression of skills that we want our students to learn and that we want ourselves to learn. So someone said to me, wow! And oh! We don't want any whoas going on. That's why you have coaches. And truly, we wouldn't expect like any, and that's the other thing. I would never expect anything replicated, because I would never replicate practice from one year to the other myself, because it's dependent on my learners' needs.
Okay, so on to performance standards. Learning intention, I can use the performance standards to determine what my students know and which skills and strategies they need to move forward. So Debbie is going to lead you through what she does in her classroom in terms of identifying the learning needs. And of course, in a primary classroom, that's usually assessing reading and writing and oral language. Okay?
So we're going to pass out this lovely rainbow tool, which is why we had rainbow colored sticks. We wanted to make a connection to our rainbow tool, because we're going to take a look at it. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I do not consider what we're going to share with you necessarily the best practice ever, because my practice has changed since that. But in a wild effort of cleaning up my computer, I dumped all my pictures and a lot of evidence, because I just thought, oh, my computer is so slow, etc., etc. And since that moment, I've regretted it deeply. All right, so this is actually from Faye Brownlee's. I don't think it's from the DART, but it's one of her assessment tools. And there's a reason why it's moose. Because the DART this is for grade 2, but the DART for grade 3 is about taking the Bowen Island ferry, which, if you live in Prince George, nobody has any background information, and our ferries look a lot different from the big ferries that people travel between islands on, and there's no background information, and it takes us a long time to build up that background information. So I like the story about the moose, and we modify it for our grade 1 readers, and we have another applicable story that's out of our kids' background information. Because in this instance, I am taking a look at comprehension skills. So we have, as a staff, determined that we are going to assess our students' comprehension skills, and so we've handed out the same story to all of our students, with a caveat. So on some of our students who are not reading yet, we've taken out the print. On some of our students, we've taken out some of the sentences that we know that have words that they cannot read, because we're assessing comprehension. And if you can't read the words, it's pretty hard to assess the comprehension. So I want you to have an overall view. This is September, so we're assessing grade 2 comprehension out of one of Faye Brownlee's assessment tools. So here we have Taylor, and Taylor is really probably an above average student. In fact, I know he's above average. His was the only one I could find. So he is retelling information. First, tell what you know about the moose already, because we do know things. Now we're going to read the story after we've told what we know about the moose. We're going to read that story. And because it's about comprehension, not fluency, I'm going to actually read that story aloud to them and then give them time to read it, so that the students who don't have that text in front of them will have heard that information too. Because I'm really interested right now in their comprehension skills. We've been working on comprehension, and I'm wanting to do a bit of an assessment. So he's got some information there. So let's take a look. I just want to have a quick look at the next page. There we go. And you can see that his question, when does the calf grow antlers? It's a fairly good question. It demonstrates understanding that some calves will, and tell 3 details about baby moose. Moose babies are called calves. Moose calves are born in the spring. The mother takes care of the calf for about a year. And then, his good question, analyze. What animals is a moose similar to, and tell why. A moose is similar to a deer because they both have antlers and dark skin. And that's about what you would expect. And then he had a fabulous picture on the back. And that's some very good information for someone who's 6 years old who's sharing out his information. So, and he has answered that in 20 minutes. He's done both pages in 20 minutes. So I think that he has done a very good job of responding and sharing what he's known, what he knows. So then we get to the performance standard. Now, this part is pink, because this part I have been working on in the strategy. So I want always to remember this is where I've been focusing on with the class. So in that strategies piece, which although I was checking him for comprehension, in this piece, because strategies is such an important part of beginning readers, with his group, with his reading group, that's where I've been working with. And so before I actually give out the performance standards, I highlight what I've been working with so that I actually know when I'm assessing Taylor that as a reminder, because I'm not working, because I'm differentiated, I'm not working with everybody in that box, but I'm working with him specifically on combining font in his strategies use during his reading instruction time. And for the rest of it, I'm just assessing where he's at in terms of comprehension and this is, I would say, September, October. So I've got a pretty good idea. His oral reading is fluent. He's actually, he's like reading at PM benchmark levels 30. I didn't, since they're, if they're early primary, I start focusing on comprehension as soon as I have that reading fluency happening. So I've done my assessment. So now I have a pretty good picture of, and you can see that my target for him, because I just scanned, this was my target, and he's in there. So you know what, that's telling me I need to move on, because that's what I've been teaching to. So then we have his writing assessment, and we did, of course, Halloween was coming up, and they like to write. So we're working on making an event into a story and telling details that make the event interesting. And then there was the criteria. And again, you go back to when we were talking about beginning, middle, ending on the previous sheets about learning intention. Tell details about only one event. That's so hard for everybody. Use descriptive words and use the criteria for writing for an audience. So Taylor's in grade 2. So after a point in grade 2, after we've had them for a couple of years, we no longer say that capital letters we have unspoken criteria, which we call our criteria for writing for an audience, that are plastered all over our room. And those are criteria that we assume, and you should assume, that you are using, so that we don't have to continuously repeat capital letters, periods, all those kinds of things. Not that we're not always continuously working on them, it's just that it would be just painful for us to write out those things all over and over again. So we call them writing for an audience, and we plaster them up, and we refer to them constantly. And then we like Daily 5. Everybody likes Daily 5. So we wanted to do a word collector for them, so they have a vocabulary bank that they can use before they start writing. So we do our word collector as a group, and he chooses which words that he thinks that he might use, because one of the criteria was use descriptive words. And we can't expect our students to use descriptive words unless they have a bank of descriptive words to refer to, so we're going to give them that strategy so that they have something to refer to.
Did he come up with those words by going through?
We actually did a brainstorming event where everybody brainstormed all their words, and then they chose for themselves which words they thought would fit into their story, because they knew what they were going to use, you know, so they wouldn't of course use every word, but there might be some words that they could use from the brainstorming. So, and then I did a big chart for the whole class of all the words. So if they didn't record something on this word collector that they thought that they might use a little later, and they go, woohoo, I wish I had that word, they could see it and add it. And the event is, I like trick-or-treating with my friends, and the details, make sure you wear a costume, tell the person where you are meeting. Find the house you're going to, go up to the house, say trick-or-treat. Now, those are good details for the event, liking trick-or-treating. The story has nothing to do with the details. All right? So, but he's got this part. He understands this strategy. He understands, and he's got this strategy down pat. He knows it in isolation, but when it comes to actually using that skill, it's a different story. All right, I'll read his story to you. So he wrote his story, as I said, he missed the mark totally on using his planning sheet. I hope I have the story there. Here we go. So, green zombies are chasing me into the dark Halloween woods. I have to try to get home. I'll get in my scary costume. We get my sleepy mom to call my friends to come with me. I will ask my mom to go with me. We will make a plan to which black scary house we're going to. We go up to a spooky big house. We ring the small doorbell. When the man opens the door, we say trick or treat. We say thank you and go to the next house. So my apologies, he did get it. So he did match the two. His introduction, though, is a little off. Green zombies are chasing me into the dark Halloween night woods. And then he gets to his story. So somewhere along the line, he's got that impression that it's very important to use those descriptive words. So his impression of his self-evaluation is he did follow the learning intention criteria about story writing. And he did use the criteria for audience writing. Word wall words is part of those expectations of audience writing. No, he didn't bother looking, and this, you know, he did not spell word wall words correctly. But he still thinks he wrote using that criteria for an audience. So really, with those evaluations, I'm wanting to know what he thinks he's doing. That evaluation is telling me that he's thinking that he is meeting the criteria that is being established. I know now that I have to work with him on the introductory story being connected to the rest of the story. So let's take a look at the performance standard.
We don't have the writing one up. Do people have it at their tables?
Okay, so when we look at the writing performance standard, which is exactly the same goal, same outcome. But Paige and Kirsten have reformatted it into this rainbow spectrum. So when we look at the writing performance standard, well, knowing that he's in grade 2, take a look and see where you think he is in that writing performance standard.
Oh, it's personal writing.
No, this is just a little bit.
It's really handy because it's really easy to see where the kids fall in, right?
Here is his part of his writing. You can see that he's made an effort to add some descriptive words. You know, in the second reading through, he's made an effort to add descriptive words, but there is no sign whatsoever of any of the conventions. Well, he does have one down here, and he has something floating around up here, but I think it's just an unerased something. Does he have a story? Absolutely has a story. Yeah. Does he have skills? Absolutely has skills at the grade 2 level. So where do you think he's at?
I think he's a green.
You think he's green? Yeah. Absolutely. And we had a fabulous conversation as the coaches, because you use the same performance standard for the fall assessment as you do for the spring assessment. So you'd have to be a fairly strong student within that grade level. So I really like this progression of skills, because it allows you to take a look at the child within that scope, rather than what I was doing before was cutting up pages and pieces and gluing them all together to get some kind of progression going. Because in any given classroom, just like we're all diverse learners at different spots, our students are all diverse learners at different spots. And it's so difficult to take one narrow piece of paper with boundaries and say our kids fit in there, because they don't. Because then Taylor fits all over this spectrum, really, and this is such a step forward in my view. It's such an enormous step forward to move that. So after we do our assessment of Taylor's reading, then I always meet with Taylor, and I always have that little discussion with the parents. And at the end of all the discussions, we've gone through the performance standards. I've talked with Taylor and his mom. This is where you're at. This is where we're going. And Taylor's identified where he's at and where he's going and everything. I always ask him, what's your goal for this year? What's your goal for the next couple of months? And now Taylor has a mission in life, and his mission was to research the Titanic and make a presentation. And so that's what he wanted to do. Now, again, I do not believe in homework, but I believe in home learning. Well, what can I do to help you get to that goal? I need you to look for those books that I'm going to need. And I've been wanting to do a PowerPoint. All my grade 2s want to do PowerPoints all the time. So I want you to help me do a PowerPoint. Okay, how's your family going to help you? They're going to look up the information on the computer. We're going to go to the library. We can get books. Okay, how are you going to help yourself? He's going to read lots. He's going to do drawings and diagrams. He's going to work really hard to get this presentation together. So 3 weeks later, Taylor marches in, and he has this phenomenal presentation, which some of you may or may not have seen, about the Titanic. And from that presentation on the Titanic, he's wondering how a bear was floating by on an iceberg. So then he had to do water currents. And then he had to do polar bears. And then he's amassing all this information, and he's starting that journey of personal inquiry. So it's very interesting, because very rarely when we ask, well, what's your goal? It's never what you expect. I had a little boy whose goal was to figure out what was the difference between the old light bulbs and the new light bulbs. And he did this massive inquiry about why we're all switching light bulbs. And I think that's interesting, because I had no idea why we were. But, but it's that how do we accommodate we're struggling with how do we accommodate the students' needs to learn and what they need to learn with what the curriculum, and how do we fit that all in. And I'm always amazed at students' individual goals. I always make sure that I commit myself to them reaching whatever that learning goal is, and so and their family commits themselves to reaching that goal. And if you're doing learning at home, because the student is so invested, you don't have those behaviors that you have if it's assigned homework. And we get the same result. The student gets to practice their skills, but in a much, much more willing environment and supported by the family. So that's what we do. We get that goal figured out. We get where are our students out. We use our performance standards. I've figured out where that kid is on the performance standard. I've figured out where he is with his writing. I'm starting to get an idea of who he is as a learner because I've talked to him about what his learning goals are and what his interests are. And I'm starting to develop a profile of him as a learner. And Paige is going to be talking, and Kirsten are going to be talking about profiles of developing class profile.
Do we want to talk about the engagement tool now, or does Marilyn and Paige, would you like to? As I said, that's one of the things I've noticed that probably is most unique in classrooms where formative assessment is truly embedded, is the engagement of the students, the focus, the ownership, the self-regulation. So to be able to use a tool like the engagement continuum would be very valuable for your information and the students' information.
I gave those out to everybody yesterday.
Yeah, they're on the green sheets. Just take a few minutes, take a look, talk to your AV partner.
Question for you, do you guys have these for like,
Very nice.
Okay, so that's a very, very quick look at the engagement continuum. Debbie wants to say just a few words and then any burning questions, and then we'll move on to one last piece. So, what would you like to say?
So, in my mind, everything we've done so far with community of learners and the spiral of inquiry and AFL is moving us towards engaging our learners. That's our purpose here, is to how can we keep our learners more engaged? What can we do to increase the engagement in our learners? And this is a very, very important piece because it gives us a chance to take a look at, as educators, take a look at maybe what do we need to be doing a bit differently.
Any burning questions, comments before we move on?
Yeah, I'll just talk about it
Sure.
a teeny bit.
Yeah.
I always like to start with sort of looking at what we, on the traditional performance standards, we call fully meeting, but I really like this language of applying. I'm just going to look at that applying column for a moment. And Mary Lynn and I, lots of people have been talking about how we're going to think about this and what are we going to do with this. So Mary Lynn and I just sat down one afternoon and tried to envision what it might look like if we could create something as a frame for conversations, as a frame for our own thinking about where our students are with engagement. And what I found really interesting, you'll see here, we've got consistently participates in learning opportunities, and we all know when we're thinking about as we're teaching our class, which children are choosing to be, and it's not always whether they are choosing to be engaged also, it's sometimes have we created the access points for them to be able to be engaged, but we're always scanning for that, aren't we? So we have to kind of think about, is this child participating in the things that are happening in the class? And do they know things about their own strengths and challenges as a learner? Do they know how to set goals to improve their own learning? And do they recognize that there are various things that can support them in their learning? And do they recognize that there are different ways that they can show their learning? And are they beginning to show some sense of responsibility to the learning of the community? Do they offer support to each other? And that's sort of what we would hope for, and that's why we kind of start there. But what I found really fascinating as I've been going around and we've started working with it and sharing it with people, 100 of my student teachers took it out to their classrooms to start using it with their teachers as a way of playing with it. We're hearing that there's so many different points of access to this, and when I came out to visit many of you in your schools, I was hearing that as well. People are saying, oh, well, I remember Debbie, you said we're working on Mind Up, this seems to fit really well with this, or other people saying it seems to fit really well with our self-regulation strategies that we're working on. Or, you know, it seems to fit with what we're trying to do with formative assessment or the community of learners. And this is just something that we've created as a frame for thinking, and we're happy to entertain alterations to it if you start working with it and you find it useful. If you have suggestions for how it might be different, that would be great. We also wanted to just talk about when we got into this journey into deeper water. You see, we're using the same language as Laura is using in her Aboriginal understandings. rubric, it's not really a rubric, but that again is a conversation tool. We just tried to talk about some of the things that you would hope them to begin to see as students begin to take a leadership role in supporting their colleagues, that kind of thing. Marilyn, did you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, last year we tried it out in several classrooms. We got some really good feedback from teachers, and it really sort of helped them think about their inquiry question focus a lot around how do we engage our learners. And that was their exploration for the year, because ultimately I think that's what every teacher wants, a group of engaged learners, and then you can just slide. Because it feels like there. So it's a nice beginning point anyway.
And some of us have been having conversations about how this may be a starting place for our colleagues as a group of learners. Where are we on this continuum, and how can we use that as a starting place for thinking about, you know, some of us, maybe not in this room, but some of us in the profession, of course, are at that place that Debbie was talking about earlier, about how you're not engaged with your own profession anymore, and how can we begin to revitalize that for ourselves. And isn't it amazing when it takes hold and you feel that energy too. So we just hope that it'll be useful.
That was my thought, was in thinking in Spiral, how the question from the school as an engagement, as a school engagement in their question. That would be a great rubric for that too, just for people to be able to look and self-assess and, you know, maybe say I'm green, yellow, red in some of those places. Have a learning intention around your own school question would be cool.
And this is all leading to developing your class profile. And there are many, many ways to develop a class profile. This is just one example. Personally, I like to develop a class profile because it gives me that overview of where I'm going and how I'm going to get there. So it becomes my learning intention and my criteria, because it identifies for me the strengths and needs in my classroom. After I've done my performance standard in reading, my performance standard in writing, and performance standard in oral language, now I know exactly what it is I need to work with the whole group, plus I know where I need to go with individuals. But my class profile helps me to focus on developing what I'm going to, my teaching strategies and my content, where I'm going for the next little while. The performance standards contain the metacognitive strategies. And so when we use the performance standards, we're identifying those metacognitive strategies that need to be focused on in our teaching. So for me, it helps to clarify, and it keeps me on track, because, as I say, it becomes my learning intention and my criteria to make sure that I'm leading my learners forward. So that's what the class profile does. Did you have anything to add?
Yes, should I do that now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Mary Lynn's going to talk about this a little bit as well. We have like Debbie said, of course there's lots of different ways of creating a class profile, and this is just one model that you might want to use. We're just trying to offer you a tool. As I've gone out and met with people, I see that people have their own, lots of people have varied ways of doing it. So we're not in any way trying to dictate that you do it a particular way. Terrell, you use a web kind of a thing, don't you? And we've seen lots of different things. But I really liked in Faye Brownlee's diversity text, the class profile model that she had there, and we use it with our student teachers. And so as we were looking at this project, Kristen and I actually met with Faye and said, this is what we're trying to do. What do you think, what are your thoughts about your class profile tool that you created 10 years ago? Are there things that you would like to change about it? So she really worked with us to create a model of something that might be effective for you to use. And so I've got a copy of that here, and again, this is another one of the documents that will be available on our online folder. And we just thought that it would be this is just for your own personal use, but it becomes a great tool to, as Debbie said, to begin to think about who are your community of learners as a whole. How can I begin to set goals for our learning experiences? What are my focuses going to be? What am I going to start with? And the most powerful thing about that is the ability to have conversations with people about that. And that's what we really are intending to have happen when your coaches come out to your schools near the end of September, early October, you've had some time to do that scanning, to begin to maybe jot some things on what you think you may have as a group of learners, as a committee of learners. And now here's an opportunity to sit down and talk with each other and with your coaches, and perhaps your whole school team will be involved in those conversations. And what we're hearing over and over again is how powerful that is in terms of helping you to feel supported. Administrators love being parts of those conversations because then they get a scan of what's going on across the school, and you get great opportunities to move your learning forward for your students. Mary Lynn, do you want to say a bit more about that, and I'll hand these out?
So sometimes when you fill it out too, as a collective group in your school, and you see them sort of, everybody kind of shares what their profile looks like, you'll be able to see, okay, this is a hotbed, this is a class that's going to need some extra support. And so those are the kinds of things that you can start divvying up your support time to addressing some of those needs. Plus, you can personalize your classroom inquiry questions around what you're seeing in that room, so to speak. So let's say if the school is focusing on writing, I might be able to say that, I have a lot of struggling writers in here. I could use some coaching strategies around that piece. Is there any way when the coach comes in, they might be able to help with some modeling or get someone on staff that has an expertise in that could help in that area? There's a lot of ways you can deal with it. So this is really a good starting point for conversation around how we could co-design some things. Think about resource and expertise and how you embrace it as a community.
I really like it because it's authentic, because we crack those books, those guides and the curriculum that say our students should be blah, 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 because they're in grade 6 or grade 7 or whatever. But we know that there is no authenticity to that because our students are all across the board. They've not been involved in writing that particular textbook. This is so much more authentic than starting with that guidebook that informs you of what you're supposed to be teaching, because we know that's not what the students need to be learning at that moment.
So when you see that strengths and needs, those are words that we're not suggesting you use one line for strength.
So just some final thoughts. I believe we're going to move you back to your teams before the next little piece. And we don't expect you to do this now, but just some things that you might want to be thinking about with your team in terms of the students that you'll be meeting very shortly. What do they know? What do they need to learn and do? Something that hopefully you'll have a chance to discuss in the short term is what sources of evidence have we used in our schools and how adequate are they? Are there other forms of evidence that we can begin to use and to experiment with, perhaps with the support of our coaches? And as a staff, of course, as learning professionals, what do we need to learn and do to promote better outcomes? So we're hoping that that will be the conversation in the next little while. It doesn't have to be right today, but always good to kind of tuck it in the back of your mind and to be thinking of these things so that in September you're ready to move forward as a school. So, yeah.
It feels to me like that's actually what we need to do right now, is have some
right
time.
now?
We've just given you a whole bunch of stuff and some tools.
Yeah.
I think it would be a great idea for you to take some time with these things that we've just given you and these ideas. And this is such powerful information for us, formative assessment-wise, to support you as well. So I would suggest that you take at least the next 15, 20 minutes to look at the things that we've given you, think about those questions, and get some of that information down on your card. Okay.
In our school.
Back with your own team. With your own teams.
So we'll move you back. Thank you so much for your wonderful attention. It was great.